Interview with Mr. Les Cross, 14th of February 1994.
95.
95, thanks. Mr. Cross, where were you born?
In Tempe, Foreman Street, Tempe.
And what year was that?
1916. 5th of September 1916.
And I believe you moved to Newtown in...
Oh, about 1925, I think it was.
Oh. And have you spent the rest of your life in...
Effectively, yes. I was married and I lived away from here for a couple of years, but most of the time, because I was married during the war, and this was the home then.
Did you have any brothers and sisters?
Yes, I had two brothers. We did have one sister, but she died very young, so...
What are your earliest memories of Newtown?
Oh, the little church halfway down the street here.
Stop. Sorry, what were your earliest memories of Newtown?
Apart from going up to help Dad up in the shop when we lived out at Arncliffe, every Friday night we used to go there. But there's a little church halfway down the street here, St Colum's, Camdenville, and that's my earliest memory. And going to Camdenville school, I went there for 6 months, and then up to Newtown, what is now the Performing Arts School.
Right. What sort of shop did your father have here?
A herbalist. He had, well, he was there so long that when a letter came from India addressed Henry Cross, Australia, it came straight on the mail. There was no problem at all with it.
Gee. And what years did he have the shop there?
Well, we still had the shop up till about 1960, but Dad died before that. He died in 48.
And did you take over the business when your father...
No, I never went into the business at all. Jim did a little bit with it, but then the war came and he and I both went into the Navy, and so we never, we weren't trained in it, and we didn't know enough about it to keep it going.
And where did you live in Newtown?
Right here in 15 Dixon Street, Newtown.
And what, your parents purchased this house, did they?
Dad bought it, yeah.
In the 1920s?
In the 1920s.
Gosh.
Dad could earn money and spend it. He enjoyed every penny that he earned. We had a car. Practically nobody else in the street had transport at all. And we had the only radio at one stage in the street. The SP Bookies in the lane, two or three of her neighbours used to come in every Saturday and every Wednesday to listen to our radio, and the runners from the SP bookies used to come in and take the bets from the people that were in here. It was quite a normal thing to do, that.
You must have been about 10 when you came here.
9.
9.
Well, I was coming up for my 9th birthday, actually.
Right. Okay. And were you the oldest kid in the family?
No, I was the youngest.
Oh. And so what kind of a kid were you?
Oh, just normal. I don't think there was anything special about me. One problem, of course, was my accent. Everybody thought I was a Pommy, so we had, they used to have a fight every so often because of that. The kids had, there was an Aboriginal in our class, and he and I used to have a fight in one of the lanes on the way home from school because the other kids were sorting him on, and no animosity, we just enjoyed the fight.
And where did you get your accent from?
My mother, because most of my early training, of course, was from my mother, whose father was English, and that's where the accent comes from.
And it didn't make you too popular in the playground?
Oh no, particularly around here, that the pommies were picked on, but it was quite enjoyable.
So how would you describe your family back then in the 1920s?
Oh, it's hard to say. My eldest brother, Arthur, Jim and I were compatible, but we were far enough apart that we went different ways. Being 3 years younger than my other brother, he had his people that he associated with, and I had mine that I associated with, and we more or less didn't interact in that respect. I was rather active in the church down here, but Jim was rather more social, and he went with his girlfriend and things like that. I didn't have a girlfriend in those days.
You know how you said your father was a herbalist?
Yes.
Where did he get his training? It's a fairly unusual occupation in Australia.
Well, yes, but my grandmother was also a herbalist, and he'd got his training with her. In those days you didn't have formal training. In fact, herbalism was frowned on by most medical practitioners, though he had a few medical practitioners that he actually treated for things.
Was he an immigrant, your father?
Oh no, he was 4th generation Australian.
Gosh, what was his mother's name, or grandmother's name?
His grandmother's name, oh, I couldn't tell you that offhand. I could look it up, but one of his grandmothers must have been Mrs. Hart, because his mother had been a Miss Hart, so H-A-R-T-E, by the way.
I'm just wondering who the one was that was the herbalist. The grandmother.
The grandmother, the mother, my grandmother, was a herbalist. Hart was their name.
Oh, right.
And she married a Mr. Cross, who was the great-grandson of one of the immigrants come out as a guest of the government in the First Fleet.
Mm.
So.
And so your father set up this herbalist practice himself, did
No,
he?
he took over from another man that was running a herbalist company, but Dad had already been trained by his mother to as a herbalist.
And where did they get their supplies from?
Some of them they imported themselves, some they got from Newton's, some they got from
Elliott Brothers.
Elliott Brothers, and we supplied Elliott Brothers with one of our products called Sanic Oil. We sold that to lots of people around the place.
What sort of man was your father?
A quiet, studious man. A rather stocky built and quiet. He kept more or less to himself, except for his lodges, which he attended religiously, really.
Was that Masonic Lodge?
Masonic lodges, yes.
Mm. And what about your mother? How would you describe your mother?
Again, a studious woman that had been a school teacher, and a good worker in some of the social areas. She was secretary to a scout troop, and she looked after a lot of the books for Dad in his business and things like that.
What year was it that your father actually bought out the other person's practice and set up?
Oh, I couldn't say that, but it was back in the 1920s. He was always a herbalist, to the best of my memory, but he had been...
Sorry, yes?
He had been a carpenter builder before that.
Right.
But it would be in the 20s, or all my memories of him are that he was a herbalist. I never knew him to be anything else.
Mm. And how, you know how you said it wasn't really accepted by the medical profession?
Yeah.
How was herbalism, was it accepted by the community?
Oh, yes. And one of those new ones with a full screen on it. But,
you know how herbalism wasn't quite accepted? Did that mean that, was it accepted by the community, or did it affect you as a family, given that your father had an unusual occupation? Yeah. Did that have any...
It had no effect on me anyhow at all. Nobody worried one way or the other what your father did in those days. And he was accepted everywhere. And he had no trouble with it, except occasionally he had a bit of trouble with the police because they reckoned he was a fortune-telling. He was clairvoyant, but that's beside the point.
Really? And what did the police do?
Oh, they tried to say he was fortune-telling, and in those days it was a crime, actually. Well, it still is, actually. These tarot readers and so forth, they're not fortune-telling, they're just playing with cards. But clairvoyance and things like that was very much déclassé those days. Witchcraft, in fact.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Did they do a raid?
They came into his shop on one occasion and went up as more or less as being a client, and they questioned him about the various things, and he wasn't worried at all about it because he knew, even though they came in plain clothes, he said his description of it was that there was a crown above their head placed, and he had no trouble with that. As I say, he was clairvoyant. So was my grandmother, but she was a medium. She was a recognised medium. Even today, there's a lot of people know her name, Mrs. Cross Turner, as one of the clairvoyants of the period. There aren't too many of us left that can remember it, but you'll find a few around that can still remember that.
And where did how did they get this ability, or what's the family tradition about this?
Well, I gather that it comes from the Irish side of the family. Somewhere back there, we're Irish, but are very diluted, but still the ability is there.
Were your parents religious?
Mum was very religious. Dad was a believer, but not in the sense of being a religious, if you know what the difference. He knew, not as a Christian or as anything else, but he knew God. He knew that there was an afterlife, and he really knew it. Mum was an Orthodox Church of England, but Dad, well, he put himself as an agnostic. Couldn't call him anything else.
And were you as a child sent to religious schools or Sunday school or anything like that?
We went to Sunday school automatically, yes.
No.
But we didn't go to any religious schools or anything like that. When we got old enough to understand, well, we were allowed to choose our own path. Go on.
Well, what sort of discipline was used in the home?
Well, hardly any. You did what was required of you. When they asked you to do something, you did it. If you wanted something, you told them. And ex officio, I'd say no a discipline at all, except self-discipline.
Well, what if you did something you weren't supposed to do, or they'd ask you not to do? I mean, you know, if you're being naughty or a bit of a ratbag.
I don't ever remember being that way. We were taught right and wrong, and that's all there was to it. We had, as a teacher, as well as a mother and father, we had an old lady that came to us when we were in Arncliffe as a cook, and if we'd done anything wrong, she would have been most distressed about it, and so we never distressed her. She was a lovely old lady.
Was your family affluent? Like your father's business, did it do well?
Oh, and how? As I say, we had the only car in the street. Dad bought this place for 3,000 quid, which was $6,000 if you translate it with the increase of what's the name, it come out something over $1 million, I would think. We had radios, Our dad played with radio. He didn't do much with them, but he learned how to build them. And back in the 20s, when the 2BL and 2FC were commercial stations. 2FC was Farmers and Company, and 2BL was Broadcasters Limited. And then the ABC took them over when the ABC was started. So...
Oh, you're talking about the radios. You can remember when radios first came into existence, really?
Pretty well, yes.
Yeah.
While we were out in Arncliffe, we had radio. The broadcasting stations were long wave in those days. A much longer wavelength than the present day broadcast band, and we had an aerial that stretched from a pine tree in the middle of the drive, and it was onto the roof of the veranda, and of a quiet night, with nothing connected, we could actually hear 2BL. I've figured out how it worked since then, but it's just one of those anomalies that I'm always running into.
Well, if you were about 9 in 1925,
Yes.
So you were 14 in the 30s. Well, were you expected to contribute in any way to your family's income, or even just helping around the house? What was the expectation?
Well, we did small jobs around the house, nothing very big. Contributing to the income, no, we didn't do that. We carried on in school for a couple of years after that. And then I came out and got myself a job, and Jim went to work for Dad for a while.
How did the Depression affect your father's business?
It didn't, not in the least. He was supplying a very good service, and people, a service that people needed. He wasn't exorbitant in his charges, so it didn't affect his business at all.
So he would diagnose and then prescribe
Yes, and he'd send the script down to the bloke downstairs, and they mixed up the medicines. They actually boiled up their own herbs and made their own decoctions and things like that. So one of my aunts and Bob Thornton, Tom Thornton, were employed down below to look after the shop and to dispense anything that had to be dispensed.
Well, what did your family do for fun, if we're looking at the late 20s? What sort of things? Did the family do things together?
Only in the local church here. I was in the choir, and Mum was active as arranging the fetes and things like that. And but apart from that, we more or less went our own ways.
Right. Well, in a typical evening, say, after you've had the evening meal, what would you do?
We'd sit round the table and argue with religion, because if we sat down, as we often did with 7 to the table, there would be 7 views of religion represented at the table.
It sounds like you had quite an unusual sort of childhood.
I should think it was, actually, because we were encouraged to be us, not necessarily to conform to anything.
Well, where did your parents get these views? What were the influences on them?
Well, my grandfather on the mum's side was a sea captain, and they, of course, on Dad's side they were always, well, shouldn't say rebels, free thinkers on his side, because after all, most of the people that came out with the First Fleet were really free thinkers. They did things their way, and the establishment couldn't put up with it, so they were removed.
Well, what was a typical meal? You say your evening meal.
Oh, I couldn't say that. Meat and vegetables, always followed with sweets. In the winter, always preceded with soups. Well, they were just meals, good meals.
Did your mother have domestic help?
Yes, had the lady that I mentioned was a cook, came to us as a cook.
And that was it?
That was it, yeah. There was a lady came in every week to help with the washing. In those days there were no washing machines, and all the washing was done out in the copper and in the 2 tubs that were there. So.
How would you describe your mother's working day?
Oh, hard to say. She'd get up in the morning and talk with the lady what we needed in the way of food and so forth, and then very often she'd go up to the shop and help up in the shop with the bookkeeping and even preparing the medicines. She did quite a bit of that.
And I was going to say, the question is, did they like their employment? But your father...
Oh, yes.
He must have loved his work.
He loved his work. He knew what he was doing, he knew what he wanted, and that was it.
Who were his clientele? What sort of range of people came to him?
Well, starting at the top, quite a lot of the solicitors, barristers, going down to the ordinary people in the street, that working men and so forth. You name it, he had them.
Would you describe your parents as happy people?
I wouldn't say happy, I'd say contented. It's,
Okay. Oh, you mentioned before that you had a sister.
yes.
And she died.
She died, that would be 1911. 1911.
Do you know what caused her?
Diphtheria got her.
I think that killed a lot of children.
Yes.
Yeah. Were there a lot of kids in this neighbourhood?
Yes, quite a lot.
Well, who were your friends?
Half the street actually. Everybody that came to the church, all the church was the centre of our living here. It was active. There was something there every night. Every night of the week there was something doing in the church.
What kind of things?
Well, the girls' brigade on Monday, the Mothers' Union on Tuesday, the choir practice on Wednesday, the social club on Thursday, the Church of England Boys Society on Friday. And every night of the week there was something doing. And then every so often the girls would invite everybody and they'd have a social on the Monday night. And sometime later in the month, the boys would put on a social for everybody on the Friday. So the church was the centre of the community.
What was the name of that church?
St Columns.
Was this area here an affluent neighbourhood?
No, not particularly. They were working people. Some of them were affluent, some of them were really poor.
So really this was a mixed neighbourhood?
Oh yes, very mixed. The a young bloke that used to live in number 7, his a Carmody, Fred Carmody, he was with a council in Parramatta. The last I heard of him, but he was the only boy with glasses around the place, and they were in really straitened circumstances. They had to rely on the old lady's pension and the mother's pension to exist. They were really poor. But on the other hand, there were people that had quite good jobs and could afford quite decent things.
So, was there much class distinction between those who were affluent and those who were poor? So
that didn't exist, not around this area. It could have existed elsewhere, but it didn't exist in this area.
Did your father move to Newtown because the business was in Newtown? Was that his motivation?
No, the lease had run out on the place we were living in Arncliffe, and they wanted, he wanted to buy the place we were in, but the estate agents mucked him about, and he looked round for another place to buy, and this was it. And he bought this.
Okay, so Liz, who were your friends in the 20s after you moved here?
Oh, the Seddons I can think of. They were wharf labourers. The Dillons, when the Reverend Dillon became the minister for this particular church, the curate. I just can't think of all the others. I can picture their faces, but names always escape me even now.
Well, what sort of things did you do together with your friends?
We'd go out to the beaches or to the show, or walk across the harbour bridge, all that sort of thing.
What beaches did you go to from here?
Mainly Bondi, because you could scale the trams from here. Nobody had a penny to pay the tram fare, but we thought nothing of getting onto the tram on the wrong side between stops. And when the guard came along, you just drop off and grab the end of the tram as it went past. So that we thought nothing of that. It was just normal, because those people that had the penny that wouldn't pay it because the rest of the mob didn't have a penny to make the trip.
And you mentioned walking across the harbour bridge. Why did you do that?
Oh, for the experience, the sight of it. See, it was brand new in those days. It was just something new. Prior to that, prior to the opening of the bridge, they'd had punts going across from at the two ends of the quay over to Milson's Point, and your cars and horses and drays and that all went over on punts. Now, after they opened the Harbour Bridge, well, that was a night out to walk across the bridge both ways. Oh.
Would you catch a tram down to sort of...
down to the quay and then walk up to the bridge.
What else did you do?
Oh, I played football, of course. I played tennis. Soccer was the football that I played with the people in the street here. Down the church we had a soccer team. Then I played tennis with nearly everybody from round because there was a good tennis court down on the corner of Pearl Street and Alice Street. That's long since gone, but it was a good tennis court there. And we played tennis there, and then we went into a C-grade competition. And
Did you ever go to the movies?
oh yes, every Saturday, that Saturday afternoon, that was a must. That was the matinees, all the well, what you'd call the cartoons, effectively, the westerns and that type of picture of a Saturday afternoon.
Could most kids afford, tennis and the movies and that kind of thing?
No, not all. They could all afford the movies because, after all, that only cost you threepence, 3 cents. But no, the tennis and that, no, only the more affluent, because you had to get your racket and things like that. But still, there were enough people around here that could afford that and played.
Can you remember any adventures that you had as a child?
Nothing special, not that far back. I can't think of anything. Jumping off the train, of course, and going to hospital, that was quite an adventure. But
tell me about that.
I was coming home from school, and I was in the front carriage of the electric train coming into St Peter's, and I swung off, and I finished up in a hospital with a gash across my arm like nobody's business.
What year would that have been in?
That would be Oh, I was 11 at the time. That makes it 27.
And what was it like? Well, what hospital did you go to, and what was it like being in hospital at that time?
RPA I went to, and it was, well, I was in an adult ward because the anaesthetics that they had to give me were rather severe. The ordinary anaesthetic that the average kid would have gone out with didn't knock me out at all. So it was just like laying in bed. Occasionally the nurse would come round, not as often as she should, but occasionally. There was a drunk up in one corner. He died actually while I was there, but he was in delirium tremens and shouting out all night. But that's about all I can remember. That was just like being in bed.
Well, how long were you in hospital for?
About a fortnight.
And how did your father feel about you getting traditional medicine rather than the herbal type?
Well, this was a sewing up job. It wasn't something that herbs would cure. It was a huge cut right across. And they didn't show it, but look.
Oh, gosh.
And they only put 3 stitches in that. The doctors were quite sure that I'd lose that arm. And my old man said, no, you'll keep that going. And I came out of hospital and I've not been back yet. We took the stitches out ourselves, but there were only 3 stitches in that one.
Gosh.
But it came on.
Mm. You know, when you were with your friends, you'd talk about playing in the street.
Yeah.
Was it safe to do that?
Oh yes, quite safe. They played all sorts of games in the street, cricket and football and things like that, because after all, most of the traffic was horse-drawn. The bread was all delivered hot from the factories. There were a couple of bread factories just round here, and the bread came out from them, and it was still hot when it was delivered down the street. The milk came out in a horse-drawn vehicle, and it had 2 taps on the back, and you took your jug out and he opened he filled a measure that he had, and then he filled it into your jug, or your billy if you took a billy out. Oh yes.
What other kind of deliveries were there at that time?
Well, pretty near everything, particularly down the back lane. Rabbits were delivered quite often, 2 for 6pence.
Why do you say particularly down the back lane?
Because most of the people lived in the back of their houses, and the vendor had come down the back lane, rabbits, rabbits, or clothes props, all that sort of thing. Everything, the bread and the milk were usually delivered to the front, but the other things were, the wood and coal was delivered to the back. All those deliveries, things that now you'd, if you got them, you'd have to cart them yourself. The little shops round delivered the groceries for you. Well,
Can you remember when electricity was connected to this house?
yes, that was very soon after we came in. Dad got electricity on because he'd had a blow with the gas company anyhow, and when it was connected, the tailor round the corner had been waiting for 2 years to get 3-phase into his place, but the Balmain Electric Light Company wouldn't bring 3-phase up just for one client. But when we came in, we had 3-phase for the stove and 3-phase for the bathroom. So we got the 3-phase connected, and they carried it round to the tailor around the corner.
And when did most houses then get electricity? So gradually after that?
Yes, I really couldn't say. It was a very gradual process. Most of them still had gas light for quite a few years after we became all electric.
And what you used the term 3 phases. What does that mean?
That means that you need, for some things, 415 volts to operate them, and they do that by having 3 different lots of 240 volts separated in time by a small amount of time, so that one comes up to its peak and the other one is coming up and the other one's down the bottom, and so you get 415 volts continuous rather than 240 volts, which actually comes out in short bursts.
So you then had the electric light, I assume, and you had a stove and hot water. Well, what about things like electric fridges and...
Well, fridges didn't come into existence for quite a long while after that. Somewhere in the 30s we started getting fridges, washing machines and things of that description.
Oh, right. Well, what was the impact of the car, and how did that happen? You had a car in the 20s, or
Yeah.
what sort of car would be nice to know, but I'd like to know about how, I don't know, the sort of the creeping encroachment of the car. I mean, now kids couldn't play in the street because they'd get run over. How can we talk about that change?
Yes. Gradually, of course, back in the 20s, most of the traffic was by horse-drawn vehicles and a few trucks, but the trucks all had solid tyres and they were going slow enough that we could swing onto the back of them and put our feet up on the back axle, and when they got to where we were going, say coming down from Newtown school, we'd whip onto the back of the truck, put our feet up on the back axle of the truck, and when it came down to well, it wasn't Union Street in those days, it was, I've forgotten that one, but anyhow, when we got down there, you just put your feet down, started running, and let go, and the truck went on without you. No problems.
Wonder you didn't get killed.
Oh, a few of us did. Most of us didn't.
Well, were there bad accidents?
Oh, a few, not very many. Mainly people doing stupid things, like one accident that happened with people driving a car. I forget who they were, but they were very, very wealthy at the time. They were passing through Newtown, and Newtown Road turns just outside the was the Congregational Church. It's now the Greek Orthodox Church, and they hit the post on the footpath so heavily, and it was a thick post too, a real thick one, that I could put my hand down like that between the post and the ground. Killed a lot of them, but there weren't all that many accidents like that.
Hmm. Well, and just thinking about the time with all the horses in the street, did somebody go around and clean up their manure, or was the place filthy?
No. In those days we had street sweepers going all the time, up and down King Street and all through the city. Actually, they had the street sweepers, so the place was kept relatively clean.
What did they do with the manure? Did people get it for their gardens?
Well, some of them got it for the gardens, but I think most of it was taken for the parks and things like that, but I don't really know that.
Speaking of gardens, did people have gardens, most houses?
A lot of them, but not, I wouldn't say most even then.
Was there a garden here?
We had a big garden and lawn, and a fern house on the side there.
A fowl house?
A fern house.
Oh, fern house.
Oh yes, we had flowers in the back corner of the, we had bantam chooks and things like that in the back corner of the yard there. They kept us supplied with eggs. Yeah.
Okay, well, how far did you roam? Or, generally, where were you free to roam?
Well, we roamed everywhere, actually. Over into Marrickville, one tennis court, a central tennis courts over there in Marrickville. We'd go over there of a Wednesday night sometimes and play there until 11 o'clock.
At what age were you doing that?
Oh, be about 16.
Did you ever, as kids, go out to the airport? That was just being
Oh,
sort of...
yes. That was a Saturday afternoon, a Sunday afternoon after Sunday school walk. To get there, we used to go across the brickworks, Sydney Park now, but there was a big brickworks there operating at the time. We go through that, past the two-up school, and then down onto the railway line, and walk along the railway line across the railway bridge, and off into a Mascot airport. It was only very small in those days, mainly biplanes and a few odd larger planes, but nothing very much.
Mm. Were you ever there when there were any sort of big momentous sort of flying events, or...?
I was never there, though I did see the Southern Cross there a couple of times and things like that, but...
Tell me about this two-up school. Was it in the brick pit?
In the brickworks.
Oh, yeah.
It wasn't down in the brick pit, it was just as you went off the Mitchell Road, there was a two-up school in among all the brickworks buildings.
Mm. And how many people would they gather there on a Sunday, would they?
I'd gather there on a Sunday. In that particular area there'd be possibly 100, 150 people playing two-up.
And was it widely known that it was on?
Well, as far as I know, everybody knew it was on, including the police.
Mm. Well, what were the police like at that time? I mean, well, was it just sort of understood? Were they paid off or what?
Sometimes they were paid off, but by and large they ignored that sort of thing. It wasn't doing any harm, and they knew where everybody was. If they wanted to pick somebody up, they knew where to find them. Oh, yes.
Did you have any run-ins with the police?
No, I never had any runs-in with them.
Mm. Some of the police at different times have been quite famous. Did you know any of them? I mean, whether you had a run-in with them or not. Did you know any of the local police?
I knew of them, but I didn't know them. There was Snarvel and people like that on the bridge.
Who's Snarvel? I've never heard of him.
He was one of the police constables.
And what was he like then? What was his reputation?
If he caught you being a vandal or something, he'd kick you and tell you to get the hell out of it. He more or less made his own court of, but in those days, of course, they were permitted to do that sort of thing, and it kept the vandalism down very severely.
Can you remember any other of the local police who are a bit notorious or just well known?
I can't think of them offhand. It's a long while back, that.
Stop. Were there places that you weren't allowed to go, that your mother... No? Your parents were very liberal.
I don't think so. Everybody seemed to be the same.
Ah.
There was nowhere that you couldn't go. You could go to Clay's up at the bridge. That was a vaudeville house. Actually, Clay's was a training ground for Williamsons. If you could get through Clay's on the stage, then Williamsons would consider you for their shows. But if you couldn't go through Clay's, they wouldn't even look at you.
And what was Clay's exactly?
A vaudeville house.
And what do you mean by that? I don't know what it is.
They had actors and stand-up comics and jugglers and you sure on the TV there was a session there went every week with the old vaudeville, and that's just what Clay's was.
That's all right, Martin. Come on. Come on.
And what about what about Williamsons? What was it? Williamsons, you said?
Yeah.
What were they?
Oh, don't you know J.C. Williamson's? The big entrepreneurs with they are behind things like the Superstar, Jesus Christ Superstar, and all those things. Your education has been muchly neglected.
Yeah, sounds like it.
Yeah. All the big TV actresses, if you ask them, Williamson's gave me my start. But Williamson's only gave them a start after they'd gone through Clay's.
And did you go and see a lot of shows up there at Clay's? Where exactly was that located?
They now call it the Hub at the bridge. You know the Hub at the bridge? Well, that was Clay's.
Right.
And round the corner we had the Majestic Theatre. That was a flesh and blood theatre, but they put on, they did put on a bit of vaudeville, but they put on Shakespeare and ordinary plays, as well as the vaudeville that they had.
And did you go very often?
Well, fairly regularly, yes.
And what about the other kids in the neighbourhood?
A fair number of them went. Some of them that were interested went, and the rest of them just didn't bother.
So was it reasonably affordable?
Oh yes, it was very affordable in those days.
Don't forget the poison cart.
Oh no, I can't forget that.
What's that?
The poison cart at the bridge, Newtown Bridge.
Yeah.
After the show, you came out and there was a hot dog a stand on 4 wheels, and you could get pies and hot dogs and all that. I called it the poison cart.
And why was that?
Well, there it was, all open to everything, and you always referred to things derogatorily. The more you enjoyed them, the more you panned them.
As a kid, did you have toys?
Yes.
Tell us about some of those.
A few cars, and one little toy that I always remember. This is going back a long way. It had a little wheel on the front and a wire body and a tin plate man on it, and you wound string around the axle of the wheel and then pulled it and put it down, and it skidded along the hall like nobody's business. I had a steam engine. Yes, a few things like that.
And what about books?
Oh, books by the million. Dad read, Mum read, and we all read.
And what sort of things were your favourites?
My favourites were the sci-fi type of book. Science fiction, yeah.
Like Jules Verne?
Jules Verne, Asimov, Campbell, all those people. Heinlein I was never very happy with. But
He wouldn't have been around when you were a child.
yes, it was just coming up around then, yeah. Amazing Stories was my favourite magazine. It became analogue afterwards. They changed it a couple of times and it became analogue. But that was my favourite reading because it opened up areas of knowledge that you don't really find in normal reading.
Just up there? Yeah. 1995. We were talking about books and toys. Did most kids have access to books and toys?
Well, they had access, but not very many were interested in books. But football and cricket and things like that were their main interests. They didn't seem to be interested in any of the other toys. some of them had Meccano, of course. We all had Meccano. That was a must.
I want to ask you about your schooling. Where did you go to school?
Well, I started off in Arncliffe School, kindergarten, and then your first year there. Then we moved to here, and I went to Camdenville. I was there for 6 months. Then we moved up to Newtown School. I was there 12 months, and then I went to Sydney Grammar.
Gee.
Jim and I both went to Sydney Grammar.
And what can you tell me about your school experience? What was it like?
I enjoyed it. I was never scholastically inclined. I didn't take to the discipline of examinations, but I learned a hell of a lot. I learned a lot of things that even now I apply. I'm getting right down to Tintex, ingrown toenails. I learned this at Arncliffe School. I was 10 at the time. One of the boys had an ingrown toenail, so the teachers in those days were human, sent another boy out into the playground to get a piece of glass, and he scraped the toenail paper thin. And about a week, the toenail had grown up out of the bloke's toe, and he didn't have any. So now I use a file on mine. If ever I find them growing in, I file at the top of my toenail, and that. So, as I say, school teachers in those days were human.
And why did your parents move you from the schools locally? Was it just to go to high school?
Yes.
Oh, right.
To go to high school. Well, this school down here was a second-class school even then.
Is that Newtown High you're talking about?
No, Newtown High, that's what is now the School of Performing Arts. That was a high school that normally when you left this one here to go up there, they put you back a grade. That's a level of living with those two schools. One was a first-class school, and the other was a second-grade school.
Was that Camdenville you're talking about?
Yes.
Well, what was the problem there, that the education wasn't so good at Camdenville?
It wasn't so good because they were catering for the people that didn't have any ability. Even then, those that had trouble learning went there. The ones that just weren't academically inclined at all. But
And what was it like at Sydney Grammar?
I enjoyed that to no end. The teachers there took an interest in you. For instance, my mathematics teacher, I was moved into the senior class for mathematics each time, where I was in the C class for all other subjects. And they took an interest in you. They knew what you could do and what your capabilities were, so they treated you that way.
And what was the discipline like at school, either at Camdenville or?
In both Newtown and Camdenville, the teachers had the right to punish if it was necessary, but and occasionally it was necessary, but yeah, not often there. I don't know what Jim had, what experience Jim had. He never went to Camdenville. He went to Arncliffe School until we went to grammar.
But so when they disciplined you, did that mean caning?
That meant caning, and it was caning.
On the legs?
No, on your hands.
All right.
6. anything up to 6 strokes. And boy, could they lay it on when they laid it on.
Now, another question I wanted to ask you is, was there any such thing, either not necessarily at school but at home, but did you get any kind of sex education?
Well, I didn't. No, sex was just something that was there, and you didn't talk about it, and you knew it, but nobody talked about it, so it wasn't necessary. I suppose we got as good a sex education as you could get, because it was accepted, and
Is this at home that you're talking about?
at home, and actually out in the streets, the same sort of thing, that you wouldn't hear any sex talk or anything like that. Of course, all our jokes at school were sexist, but the rest of the time, no. Well, as far as I was concerned, I never got any formal sex education.
So what age were you when you worked out about how children were born?
Oh, I wouldn't have a clue. I more or less knew it from a tiny tot, because the children being born round the place was quite a normal thing. You saw mothers.
So you didn't get told any of this stalk stuff?
I suppose I did, but I didn't register.
Okay. Would you say that, before that you've said that the social focus of the area was the church here?
Yeah.
So what I want to ask is, was it generally a safe neighbourhood?
Yes, very safe. We had a few things happen at various times, but by and large it was a safe area.
What things happened at...
Well, at interval down at St Peter's Theatre, a bloke was kicked to death out on the tram lines in front of everybody, but...
By whom?
Oh, hooligans of some sort, we don't know. They never found out who did it and why they did it. The only thing is it was done.
Was there much talk about razor gangs at that time, or was that the wrong time?
The razor gangs were about, but they
kept to themselves.
They kept to themselves. The criminals kept the gangs to the criminal gangs. They didn't, by and large, come out into the general public.
Did you know, were there any notorious criminals locally?
I suppose there were. I never thought of that. Never took any notice of it.
So there wasn't any discussion of it at home?
It was a fact of life, and that was it.
What were the main businesses in the area?
Oh, you name it, it was there. Sweet Brothers was a general shop. Carried pretty near everything. Brennan's carried everything. They were the two big ones. Then there was hardware and clothing and, well, you name it, shoes. We had 3 or 4 big shoe companies here. Fays and Giles and,
Did a lot of people work locally?
Yes. Well, we had the big woolen mills just down the road. Kmart now, but it was
Vickers.
It was Vickers, it was Vickers woolen mills. I worked there for a little while, and the brickworks, and a lot of people were employed by the brickworks. It was a thriving industry here.
So people would be able to live locally and sort of walk to work and that kind of thing and be focused
Yeah,
locally?
locally. Most of the people could have worked in the area with no trouble whatsoever.
Was there a strong sense of community?
I think at that time there was, actually.
Did people know like the shopkeepers and know the locals, or was it a sense that your neighbours were strange? Do you know what I mean? Like now there's a...
No, well, you knew everybody in the street anyhow. They knew you. You knew everybody from the Catholic Church down the road because they interacted with our Protestant church. We'd borrow stuff from them for our fates. They'd borrow stuff from us for their fates, and it was a general interaction right across the board.
Was there any sectarianism at all?
Not that I ever saw. Everybody seemed to work together. Of course, the lady that became my grandmother-in-law was a Catholic, and she was married to a Protestant. He was one of the wardens in our church, and she always went down to her church on Sunday, so and nobody took any notice of it.
Okay. I'm actually going back to crime. Were there things like prostitution around here?
I believe there was, but I never ran into it, and my son could tell you more about that. He knew a couple of brothels around the place, but I didn't know of them. We weren't interested, as a matter of fact.
And what about things like, foreign orders, like you could get stuff that had been knocked off by people? Was that a common thing?
No, it wasn't particularly common. It was always there, but nothing, not blatant. You knew that the pawn shop was always selling stolen goods, but no, you accepted that because it just wasn't, it didn't impinge very much on the people. And that's got something stolen, but...
Was your family ever targeted, being quite affluent and being in a big house?
Not actually targeted. We did have a few things stolen at various times, but nothing very serious.
In terms of crime in the neighbourhood, what crime was the most common sort of crime?
I really wouldn't know. Entering the house at the front, and if you left the door open occasionally, but even then you didn't bother to close your doors because it wasn't particularly rife even then.
Yeah. Okay. I wanted to ask, did you go on holidays?
Oh yes. Every year we'd go camping. We'd pile everything into the car, and we did have a trailer, and the family and the dogs, and we'd head down the south coast. In those days you could park camp anywhere, so we drove until about 4 o'clock, and then we'd start looking for water. Because you always parked near water, and we put up our camp near the water. And yes, we did a lot of camping like that every year. We went down inland usually, and then came up the coast. And we never went up north. I don't know why. Dad wasn't keen on north, so we went south, and Narooma and Bateman's Bay and places like that.
They were quite resort towns, weren't they?
Yes, but they weren't anything like the resort towns they are now. You didn't have any special places to camp. You camped anywhere along the banks. There was a wide space between the main road and the bay and the river there, and you camped anywhere along there that was suitable, and tradesmen used to come along there with bread and stuff like that. But and you had to go and collect your own water. But no, you weren't tied down like you are now to going to a caravan park or something like that.
What sort of car did you have?
We started off, when we came here we had a Sunbeam, then we got a Star, that was a little one, then we got a Rio, we got that in 1927, that was our first brand new car actually. Then in 38 we got another Rio, and but before them we had a variety of cars, Bianchis and Lexingtons and Chandlers. Oh.
The other question, what were the most popular newspapers?
Of the Herald, definitely. The others were news sheets, but they didn't have the breadth of the old Herald, and you went to it for information on I haven't got the one. Well, you went to it for information on the shows and the other things that were doing. There were a lot of topical things in it, and everything was there in the Herald. The Mirror and so forth, they weren't particularly, they were there, but they weren't what you'd call popular.
What about magazines?
Well, magazines, I never went much for magazines, except the Radio and Hobbies, as it was at one stage, and Electronics Australia.
And Amazing Stories.
Oh, but they were a special that you didn't get everywhere. There weren't all that many people that were interested in the Amazing Stories and analogue and things like that. So you had to go to places like Dimmock's or Angus and Robertson's or places like that to get them.
What about comics? Did you read comics?
Oh yes, the Magnet and Boy's Own, and well, there were about 4 that we got every month. I just can't remember them all now.
What jokes do you remember?
Oh, there's some that I've heard just lately, but
From when you were a child?
yes, from when I was a child. I'm just trying to think of one. If I picked up Sunday's comic, some of the jokes that they've got in that I heard when I was a kid. I'm just trying to think of one. But I see them so often that more or less you remember them. But talking about remembering, 2 bits of doggerel come to mind. As a rule, the man's a fool. If it's hot, he wants it cool. If it's cool, he wants it hot. Always wanting not what is not. I dragged that one up from well, before I was in double figures. Another one I had the other day. Though the mills of God grind slowly, still they grind exceeding small, grinding both the great and lowly. With exactness grind they all. it took me a week to remember the third line of that. I just couldn't get it. So that's the sort of thing that impressed me.
Okay. What about songs? What were the favourite songs there in the late 20s for kids?
Over the Hill to the Poorhouse. Can you remember any of the songs from back then, Jim? We used to sing them all the way along in the cab.
Yeah.
On the road.
No, I can't remember them.
On the road to anywhere, and every heartache and every care. Got no home, got no friends, thankful for everything the good Lord sends. On the road to anywhere, and every milestone seems to say that the road to anywhere may lead to somewhere, someday. That goes back to...
that goes back before I was born.
Yeah. The first song I'm not sure whether the first song I learned was...
The road to Gundagai.
No, I'll take you home again, Kathleen.
Kathleen, yeah.
Or I'm Forever Blowing Bubbles. I can't place which of those I learned first, but again, I was knee-high to a grasshopper.
I didn't think you were that big.
On the Road to Gundagai was another one.
What were the big issues of the time?
Unemployment and the foreign debt, the overseas debt, particularly, of course, Lang and his ideas of how the place should be working, and there was what do they call themselves?
New Guard.
The New Guard. They were quite a strong group, and they were the main issues.
And what were your parents' views on Lang? What was the...
My old man said that he was right, but he was going about it the wrong way.
And what did your father think should happen?
He thought that he should have taken it a little more slowly, with a little more discretion, sort of thing, that he could have worked it through, but by forcing the issue, he made himself vulnerable.
Enforcing what issue?
The issue of repayments of the overseas loans. The money we owed overseas, he reckoned was crippling us, that we should not pay it for a period until we got back on our feet. And he reckoned that that was crippling the country. But that was a state issue. The federal issues weren't particularly important to us in those days. Well, after all, Federation was only 20 years old then, you know. As a matter of fact, even then, I was taught that it was quite standard to spell Sydney S-I-D-N-E-Y or S-Y-D-N-E-Y. You could do it either way. And that was quite acceptable. As a matter of fact, I read a book just the other day, an English book from the 1960s, and they spelt Sydney S-I-D-N-E-Y. So.
Thinking back to all the politics and the upheaval of that time, can you remember any other politicians or any election campaigns from the late 20s, early 30s?
No, I can't remember any of them now. They didn't impinge on us to the same extent because the media didn't have the immediacy that it's got now. It brings it now, everything into your home. You're belted over the head with it all the time. But it wasn't then.
What about the big anti-eviction battle down in Union Street where they shot people?
Oh, that was part of the problem with the Lang and Company, that he wanted to give a moratorium on all of that stuff until we got the country back working. And
moratorium on rents?
On everything, yes, on all debts that were beyond your capability of paying. The houses down in Union Street, they stripped the innards out of them, used it for firewood.
What was the view of the unemployed workers movement? I think they were behind that campaign. What was the view of their activities?
They were, everybody was in favour of it until the bank was closed on us, and that was done through the federal, actually. They closed the state bank, and then everybody got frightened that they might lose all their money, and they then changed their vote at the next election. But prior to that, they were all behind Lang. It took them 5 hours to walk into the domain, the people, to hear Lang give a speech just before the election. Now you can see that there were a lot of people there behind him. But then the election came shortly after that, and they'd changed their mind, and because the bank had closed, and they were afraid they'd lose their money. And
was the federal government at that time a Conservative government?
I think it was, so I'm not too sure. No, I'm not sure about that. I'd have to look that way up.
What did you know of the world outside your area?
Oh, pretty well everything. We knew farmers, we knew people from overseas. We were more or less an area where you knew everything about the outside world, only in a second-hand way, but still, because in those days a trip to Wikatoomba was an adventure. To go down to Port Kembla or any of those places was really something to look forward to.
What's your happiest memory from your childhood?
Oh, I couldn't say offhand. The whole area is contented. I wouldn't say happy. I can't think of any particular event that I would say was particularly happy, but the whole thing was contented.
What about your most saddest memory?
Pardon?
Your saddest memory?
I think the death of my grandmother in 1939. I think that would be about my saddest memory.
Okay, I think that's all that I can think to ask at the moment. Is there anything you especially wanted to say that hasn't come up?
I don't think of anything special. There's so much that I'm always talking about at various times, and nothing special comes to mind at the moment.
What? Can you remember the sinking of the Grey Cliff?
Yes, I can remember that. My aunt was a teacher in a school in Darlinghurst, a church school, and some of her pupils were actually on the Grey Cliff when it was sunk.
Did they survive?
No. They were some of the victims that didn't come out of it.
How many people died and how many survived that?
I don't know that. They're just statistics. Statistics don't mean anything to me.
And just a minute, you said there was something else that came to mind.
Yes. In 39, in the picture show down here at St. Peter's, there was a picture on with about something that happened in supposed to be in the time of Queen Victoria, and halfway through the picture they played God Save the King, and everybody stood up while that was played on the screen, and then they sat down when they'd finished. It was a fantastic thing. They rose as you'd have to see it too.
And was that because the war was on? And
No, the war hadn't started then. There was tension. The war didn't start until the end of 1939. But this was before that. And I can't think of the name of the picture, but it was one where Queen Victoria was a central character sort of thing to it. You'd have had to experience it to really realise the feeling as everybody stood up while it was played.
And why do you think people were feeling so strongly about the Queen, or the King then?
I think that at that time we still felt that we were part of history. Not so much part of the empire, but a part of history. We believed that what we did was important, and therefore we, because we were central to our country was central to the playing of the king, we automatically associated this with something that was important to us, not something that was remote from us. It was part of our living, a part of our life.
Okay. Thank you very much.
I thought you might like that bit.
Yeah.